Good morning, honourable members. This sitting is in session.
Announcements by Your Honour. Minutes. Defer. Minutes.
Honourable members, the minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, June the 3rd, 2025, to be deferred.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be deferred.
The question is that these minutes be stand deferred. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Minutes stand.
Messages from Her Excellency the President. Petitions. Papers. Government notices. Private members' notices. Notices of questions. Report from select committees. First reading of bills. Statements by ministers. Congratulatory and/or obituary speeches. Personal explanations. Motions for leave of absence. Oral replies to questions. Notice of motion for adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance. Orders of the day.
Prime Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
The question is that under standing orders so recommended be suspended. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Of standing orders are suspended. Government's business is the instant order of the day.
Madam Deputy Speaker, order number 9, in the name of the Honourable Minister of Housing and Lands, to move the passing of a resolution to prove in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Chapter 225, the vesting in the National Housing Corporation of a parcel of land more particularly described in the schedule to the resolution, the property of the state situated at Coverley in the parish of Christchurch in this island for housing development.
Our member for St. George, sir.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg your permission and indulgence to have order number 9 and 10 done in a cognate debate.
The question is, our members in favor. The question is that order number 9 and 10 be taken as a cognate debate. All honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. All member for St. Charles.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Chair, and good morning to the Chamber. The resolution before the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the approval to vest a total of 18,245.6 square meters of land at Coverley in the National Housing Corporation for the development of some 33 residential lots. In addition, Madam Deputy Speaker, on that said area of land, we also have as resolution number 10, the lease of the site at Coverley Great House, which is adjoining that piece of land, and that amount is 7,922 square meters of land on 2 lots at the Coverley Christchurch facility to facilitate the establishment of a hospice and palliative care facility for the terminally ill. And Madam Deputy Speaker, let me begin with the latter. The leasing of the land at the Coverley Great House of 7,922.5 square meters of land on 2 lots to facilitate the establishment of a hospice and palliative care facility for the terminally ill. Madam Deputy Speaker in Chamber, the Barbados Association for Cancer Advocacy wrote to the government on February 2022, proposing the use of the property of the Coverley Great House and a lot for the construction of a hospice and palliative care facility for the terminally ill. Consequently, the Cabinet approved this request by the Barbados Association for Cancer Advocacy. Madam Deputy Speaker, while I will start with the palliative care facility and the leasing of the land to BACA, and I hereafter refer to the Barbados Association for Cancer Advocacy as BACA, it would be remiss of me not to give a brief history on the lands at Coverley. Coverley Plantation in Christchurch, Madam Deputy Speaker, first appeared back in 1938. But it is only in the year 1969 that the state acquired that estate, the holdings. The Crown has previously acquired 97 acres, 1 rood, and 37 purchased by conveyance back in 1969. And I won't go into what a rood and a purchase, but only to say that is one of the measurements of land utilized in the United States and the United Kingdom. We talk about square meters and we talk about acres in this country. We don't talk about purchase and roods anymore. Wood or rood? Wood. Wood. He said wood. And 1 perch, Madam Deputy Speaker, is 1/60th of an acre, which if you use decimals is 0.00625 acres. And likewise, the rood, as the AG rightfully called it, is about the same thing, 0.23 of an acre. And back then in 1969, the state acquired the 97 acres, 1 rood, and 37 purchased by conveyance, while the BADMC also acquired 11 acres. They had some 28.82 purchased by conveyance dated 1967. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have used this lands at Coverley over the years for the purposes of housing, primarily housing. And now we want to include the use of an institution, the Coverley Great House. But the Plantation House, the Coverley Great House, and the curtilage was previously leased to a Mrs. Eudine Ramsey, and she operated there as a wedding center known as Adolphus. And those of you who are of that age and vintage would know of that. I don't think the member for the city knows about the Adolphus, neither the member for St. Michael West. And since the death of Ms. Ramsey, the Plantation House, Madam Deputy Speaker, has fallen into disrepair. And it is by no means anything new, the fact that BACA wrote to the government back in 2022 requesting the use of this great house for a palliative care facility. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, back in the 2018 manifesto of this government, we recognize the need for palliative care or hospice. And we said back then, we indicated the intention to work with organizations such as BACA on health initiatives, including a hospice for palliative care. And back in 2019, the government endorsed the need for a residential hospice and committed to using the good office of the Ministry of Health and Wellness to advance the cause. The anticipated source of support, Madam Deputy Speaker, for this hospice and palliative care facility was to provide not only the lease of the property at Coverley to retrofit the facility, and let me state here clearly, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the facility cannot be retrofitted in its current state. In the current state, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have to literally knock down the facility and build from scratch. So this would be a new palliative care facility at Coverley. But let me carry on the anticipated support of the government. In addition to leasing the property, an annual subvention as provided to most or some NGOs in this country by government. So you will get an annual subvention to assist BACA, the provision of narcotics for patients in the hospice, and this is the Trinidad and Tobago model, where the provision of narcotics for patients in the hospice is provided by the government. Accessing pension payments from pensioners when they are admitted to the hospice, and the government will ensure that those pensions for old age persons indeed are utilized to assist with the care of the elderly, and also the provision of subsidies for care of the elderly to be paid to the hospice when patients are admitted for care, example as provided for nursing homes in this country. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is worth noting that the World Health Organization, I think back in 2002, recognized palliative care as a right. The World Health Organization recognized the need to treat palliative care as a right. And some persons, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I speak here, I don't think the average man, well, I shouldn't say that. What I should say, Madam Deputy Speaker, some persons in this country don't know what palliative care is. And it is worth mentioning or taking you through what palliative care is. And I will utilize the brief, Madam Deputy Speaker, to enlighten some of the public for those who don't understand what palliative care is this morning. And palliative care refers to relieving the symptoms of an incurable medical condition. Its focus is on easing stress and improving overall quality of life. Unlike hospice, Madam Deputy Speaker, which people often associate with end-of-life care, palliative care can benefit people of any age and at any stage of a serious illness. And indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, palliative care is not only associated with cancer patients. We have a doctor in our house this morning, and indeed, persons who suffer from kidney diseases and other illnesses indeed can be treated at this facility. Madam Deputy Speaker, this program that will be instituted at Coverley, at this palliative care institution, is aimed to ease pain and help with other problems of illness. And those illnesses that might not be considered life-threatening, and I mentioned some kidney diseases, persons with NCDs and chronic NCDs. It also helps people live with the symptoms of long-running causes, such as HIV and AIDS. So you will have a palliative care facility that will not only treat with cancer and kidney diseases, but also treat with persons living with HIV and AIDS or with the side effects of treatments. Is palliative care end of life? No. Palliative care is available when you first learn, Madam Deputy Speaker, or you have a lifelong limiting illness, and you might be able to receive palliative care while you are still receiving other therapies, Madam Deputy Speaker, to treat the condition of palliative care. Having said that, end-of-life care is a form of palliative care you receive when you're close to the end of life. there are three types of palliative care, Madam Deputy Speaker, namely the physical aspect of it, then there's the pain and the symptom aspect, and then there's the, what I call the more fundamental aspect of it, which is the psychological aspect, providing the emotional support to patients, and also the spiritual aspect, knowing and acknowledging the beliefs and the values that give life meaning. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, this facility should be supported by all. There should be no political divide on this palliative care facility, because we know that sickness cuts across political parties. Persons, not only from political parties, but human beings, Madam Deputy Speaker, suffer these illnesses that must be treated. And as a caring government, we recognize the need to provide the support for BACA. And indeed, when you look at the statistics on the world stage, and I will read just a few for you. There are some 1,144 new cancer cases diagnosed in this country back in 2015. And they include prostate, breast, corpus luteum, and stomach being the most common types. Cancer-related mortality, Madam Deputy Speaker, accounted for some 523 deaths back in 2015, with prostate, breast, stomach, and lung cancers accounting for most of the deaths. And Madam Deputy Speaker, it is predicted that in the year 2035, there will be some 1,657 new cancer cases, of which 858 cancer-related deaths are predicted. Madam Deputy Speaker, we can stand here this morning and approve and debate the lease of this parcel of land in Great House Tobacco, but there is a greater need to entrench palliative care within communities in this country, and not just at Coverley Great House. We know several cancer prevention policies have been implemented in this country with regard to smoking. All public places are completely smoke-free. And we know tobacco products are indeed taxed at high rate of some 49%. So this government is indeed doing its effort best to ensure that we address, even if we can't cure 100%, but we create policies and implement policies that will allow the average man to understand that cancer is indeed nothing to play with. I have had to endure a family member, caring for them, visiting them, who indeed died as a result of cancer. That person was a smoker, very close to me, an uncle. And these are some of the things that I've told myself, that you will never see me with a cigarette in my mouth. And anytime you see me with a cigarette in my mouth, Madam Deputy Speaker, you will know that I have to be tanto loco and to take me to the right place for treatment. Because I believe that the need to live a healthy lifestyle is associated with what we do on a daily basis. We don't only come to Parliament, Madam Deputy Speaker, to speak on bills as it relates to legislation on infrastructure, as it relates to legislation on crime, as it relates to legislation on tourism or education. We have to lead by example as a government, as a parliament, in addressing legislation and policies that treat with health care. I can say without a shadow of a doubt, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the other members in this chamber, minister within the Ministry of Health, would have his say, and probably he would be more attuned to what is in tune to what is happening within this sector, within the Ministry of Health and Wellness. But I will report, Madam Deputy Speaker, that if you listen to the World Health Organization, back in 2002, the World Health Organization advocated for the expansion of palliative care when it urged the member countries like us, Barbados, to incorporate palliative care services into the cancer control and chronic non-communicable diseases program. And back in 2014, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it was the prestigious Lancet Commission who advocated strongly for the global access to palliative care, declaring, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I quote from the Lancet Commission declaration, and I quote, "To alleviate all forms of pain and suffering is an ethical duty of societies and healthcare professionals." So we have an ethical duty to treat him with palliative care, as declared in by the Lancet Commission, as declared by the World Health Organization, and as embraced by the Barbados Association for Cancer Advocacy. And indeed, I see some of the members of the board sitting here, and I know it is indeed welcoming for them this morning to see us stand and debate such a lease on behalf of the facility that they so dearly represent. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me go further, because there was a recommendation made by BARNOC, and that is Barbados Palliative Care Needs Assessment Project Report of 2012, which was commissioned by the Ministry of Health, and the work was done by a palliative care expert, and they know who that person is a Dr. Natalie Graves. I shouldn't call the name, but I think it is worth calling so that it can go on record that Dr. Natalie Graves did some wonderful work, Madam Deputy Speaker, commissioned by the Ministry of Health back in 2012, under the last government. So indeed, you see that there's no political divide as it relates to palliative care. And part of the work done by her and some of the recommendations made were to expand community palliative care through the public health and NGO sectors. In addition, the establishment of a standalone palliative and hospice care facility to supplement and expand community palliative care at the tertiary level. That is what we are here debating this morning. And the report also suggested that a public-private collaboration could be considered to achieve this very worthy goal of a hospice to help terminally ill to transition with dignity. And Madam Deputy Speaker, these are some of the factors, or these are some of the recommendations that came out of that report. But in addition, there are some supporting factors for the need for a hospice. And according to the said report, the 2012 BARNOC report, over 60% of Barbadians could have benefited at that stage from palliative care or from hospice care. The aging Barbados population and the resulting increase in incidence of NCDs will create an increasing need for future palliative care and hospice care services. It is a no-brainer, Madam Deputy Speaker. The projections of the Barbados Ministry of Health is that by 2030, 83% of all deaths in this country will result from NCDs. That's scary. 83% of all deaths will result from NCDs. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we know very well that some families cannot provide the care. And I heard the member for Christchurch, he's talking to me this morning on an issue, and he said to me that if we had this facility in place, one of his friends would still be living today because we would have provided the necessary care and support for that individual. And I know he will have his say in this chamber also on this topic of palliative care and hospice. And it is also situated in the constituency of Prince George East. And I know you relish this opportunity to be associated with such a project. This government will continue, Madam Deputy Speaker, to provide support to BACA. And I'm calling though, Madam Deputy Speaker, this morning that the private sector needs to join with us as a government and other NGOs to ensure that we don't only build one palliative care facility, but we also give BACA the opportunity to go into some other community and have such another facility. Because I am, of course, passionate about what I see here this morning, and I believe that we can prolong lives of individuals, especially persons coming from the lower economic strata in this society. They don't have the wherewithal. They don't have the cash. They don't even have the support to provide the care, the social and emotional support that is needed. And we need trained personnel to provide this care, spiritual support, and emotional support. Don't underestimate the value of emotional and spiritual support as it relates to palliative care in this country and as it relates to kidney diseases and other NCDs. Because very often we find persons suffer from mental disorders more so than just the issue of cancer or kidney diseases. When they're diagnosed and they don't have that support, it affects their mental capacity. And I see it. I have lived it. And I'm asking, Madam Deputy Speaker, while we support this lease of this parcel of land to BACA, we also urge the private sector to get on board and to provide as much support as possible, not only to QAH, but to the NGOs like BACA, who indeed can help build out the palliative care facilities across this country and address the chronic NCDs that permeate this nation. And that indeed we may talk about crime, but some of the health issues in this country are worse than crime, or just as bad as crime. And I'm not underscoring in no way the challenges that we face today as it relates to crime and NCDs. But I will put both of them on the same level of percentage in terms of how we indeed are impacted as a small nation, not only by crime, but by chronic NCDs and other NCDs. Madam Deputy Speaker, while I will give the other members the opportunity to speak on this matter of BACA and the lease of this land, permit me now to go to the other aspect of the resolution, which is number 9, the vesting of some 18,245.6 square meters in the National Housing Corporation to build 33 units. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we are doing this as a cognate debate because they're both on the said property of Corvley Plantation or Corvley Estate. We heard about the Great House and the use of the Great House. Madam Deputy Speaker, we continue to push the housing program in this country, and vesting of these lands, these 33 lots, the 18,245.6 square meters of land into NHC. We can leave it in the state, but why we vest lands in NHC? And I said this morning I would take the time to explain that. We vest lands in NHC, Madam Deputy Speaker, to give good title. The lawyers understand what I mean. We are at a stage, Madam Deputy Speaker, where we have to utilize the liquidity in the banking system to build out our housing program. Years ago, successive governments focused on utilizing government's funding, from the Consolidated Fund, and indeed from the Housing Credit Fund, and some funding that was allocated through the National Housing Corporation for the purpose of building capacity, housing capacity in this country. But we recognize, in an effort to really address the need for housing in this country, some 18,000 applicants at the National Housing Corporation. There's no way that any government can provide financing for 18,000 houses in this country. So to utilize the mortgage system, similar to how some of us built our homes, and I can speak to that, because that is how I built my home. An average boy from rural Barbados went to the bank, got a mortgage, got drawdowns, the foundation. You build the foundation, the valuers came and they assessed, and they said, yes, this is the amount, and they give you funding. Then you take that funding and you go to Ring Beam, they come again, they assess, they give you some more funding. Then you go put on the roof, they come again, they assess. That's the superstructure finish. Then you go to the internals, where you put in your tiles and your kitchen and your plumbing and everything, and they give you, you know, till 100% of that mortgage is exhausted. And that's how we build houses in the private sector. That's how the average person, low income, middle income, whatever, those from the high end in our society, and speaking to housing, that's how we build houses. So for us to access the liquidity within the banking system, that's why we are vesting these lands in the National Housing Corporation and not leaving them in the state, so that the persons who are waiting for these 33 houses at Coverley, when this land is vested, they can go to the bank, and the banks can begin the process of mortgages for these 33 homeowners. Madam Deputy Speaker, while it is only 33, it would be 33 families multiplied by 2.5. So you would have close to 70 persons being housed. That's how we work out the number of individuals who will occupy a house. You don't say 33 by 1, because within a household you have 2 or 3 persons living. So we average it 2.5. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, there's no rocket science to what I have introduced here with respect to housing. We are on a mission, indeed, to house every last person. We know the role of housing in this country. Housing, it addresses some of our social issues. It addresses the crime. It addresses sanitation, poor living conditions. And of course, when you own a home, Madam Deputy Speaker, you can leave something for your children. You can leave an asset. You can leverage that asset also to educate your children, Madam Deputy Speaker. And you can leave a legacy for your children's children. A piece of the rock is what we all Barbadians need. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not going to prolong the speech, but this resolution is pretty simple. But for me, the palliative care facility this morning, let me thank those members who journey here, and indeed we would have some other members speaking on it. It is something that is dear to this government. We are indeed living our 2018 manifesto pledge, and we are giving BACA the opportunity to provide, through government support and subsidies, to provide palliative care, the much needed palliative care for patients in this country, whether old or young. Madam Deputy Speaker, with those words, I beg that this resolution now pass.
Beg second.
Thank you.
Honourable member first. Vice yourself and Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. Thank you.
Your Honor. I speak from the agreed perspective that this morning's debate will be a cognate debate in the order expressed by the Honourable Member for St. George South, that we first deal with the matter of the lease of land to accommodate a palliative care facility at Coverley, and then we shall move to the vesting in National Housing Corporation of lands at Coverley, and I may say lands in considerable amounts. 18,000 square meters is quite a lot of land. But let us come to the issue of the care facility. And the public must not ever believe that when a parliament brings these things to this forum, that any favor is being done to the public. Under the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, the Parliament is mandated to bring these matters here. And indeed, it says Section 5, the original Section 5, would have said that sale or leasing must not be done unless with the approval of Parliament. And Parliament, as you know, Your Honor, as we do now, is a public place. It concerns itself with public debate, and that public debate constitutes public disclosure, so that the government is mandated by statute to publicly disclose. Not only does the Parliament enjoy the sovereign power to do these things, but allied with that sovereign power is the duty to publicly disclose these matters. Now, as to the palliative care facility, the Honourable Member for St. George South apprehends that there is no partisan divide in relation to palliative care, and those words are superfluous, because when it comes to matters of care for the sick, as he correctly said, there's no partisanship in these matters. I did note the prayer of the chaplain this morning, and he urged that in matters of leadership, and I think he was referring to every member of this chamber, that there should always be integrity, wisdom, and compassion. And this debate gives us the opportunity to focus on those three virtues: integrity, wisdom, and compassion. And we wonder whether the location is the best. The location at Coverley next to the airport and so on. We wonder whether that is the best. And this is not to be rancorous nor contentious, nor even contentious in a rancorous way. But if we are to be strategically united on the issue of palliative care, I wonder if our decision is wise and compassionate. One does not wish the BACA to feel that they have been boxed into a corner in having to identify these particular lands, when possibly there could have been lands better located. And I will identify those lands that are possibly better located. To pause again and say that while we are strategically united on this matter, maybe, just maybe, we are tactically divided. And this country will continue to lament the loss of what I will call the Gemmots Lane lands, all 5 acres of those lands. In the aftermath of the disposal of those lands, and I want to be more precise, I think my language needs to be more precise, and to say the alienation, that is how lawyers express the parting with lands, the alienation of those lands, that states it in a more precise way, that the country is now aware that this government has alienated a large portion of land at Gemmett's Lane, which ought to have been within that burgeoning area, within close proximity to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And one does not focus on those lands to be opportunistic in argument. I use the word burgeoning, and perhaps one will pause and consider that after the construction of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, that facility expanded itself. Its ancillary offices. It used to be the Lady Mead residences and the Enmore residences. And then that became, I think, in recent times, the ambulance facility. But in more modern times, there was the Winston Scott Polyclinic, and then the laboratory that was built some 10 years ago, I think. So that to focus on Gemmett's Lane as a possible location for that burgeoning medical facility, it is not opportunistic at all, except that this government must now take and accept the blame for having alienated those lands for purposes other than medical. And I want to say, after the fact, admittedly, that I am wondering if a facility such as the one that is now being leased to this noble and compassionate group could not have been better situated within that burgeoning facility with the Queen Elizabeth Hospital at its center. I'm wondering if that could not have been the better option. But we've parted with those lands, and we've parted with those lands maybe to the peril of the people of this country, including those in respect of whom we must display not only integrity and wisdom, but compassion. And if that is the government's claim, we join with the government, except, as I said, we are strategically united in our mandate to care for those who are less well off medically. But we must do it with integrity and wisdom and compassion. And those lands at Gemmett's Lane could have offered perhaps a 3 or 4 story facility financed by the people of Barbados through the government. I certainly saw potential for a children's hospital on one floor. I certainly saw the potential for a geriatric hospital on another floor, and a palliative care facility on another floor, and others, perhaps a larger accident and emergency facility which, for good reasons, would have been located on the ground floor for the passage of emergency vehicles, ambulances, and so on. So that I visit this Parliament with that prescription, that rather than to decentralize medical facilities into areas that may not be ideal, into areas that may not be appropriate next to an airport, I wonder if circumstances will not in future make this a reality. One does not know what will happen. One does not know what will happen. So that I do not quarrel with the government for leasing these lands. That is to be supported. One does not quarrel with the government for embracing this organization. That is to be supported. And as I've said, we become strategically united, but tactically divided. One wonders about the dimensions of the facility. Is there going to be an expansion? Who will assist with that expansion? Will it be government? Obviously, there will be need for renovation. Will this association be left to its own financial devices, or will the government assist the association? Illness is public business, and everyone who is ill becomes a part of public business if we will ever claim that we are compassionate, as the chaplain prayed for this morning. So that is our position in relation to the palliative care facility. We regret that it could not have been better located, and we regret that it could not have been more generously accommodated. While the lease is noble, I think the lease is also lacking in generosity. And one is entitled to make that criticism. But I have asked the question, who will bear the cost, whether it is the association, whether the association will receive a generous government subvention, except that I add, the government could have been far more generous in accommodating this facility within a modern complex close to the central facility of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and indeed closer to its own central facility within what people in Barbados are now envisioning, and it is not overambitious, are now envisioning as a twin to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, which would have expanded that centralized medical facility on both sides, on all four sides indeed, of that intersection, that roundabout intersection located to the, I think that would be the southeast of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. We've lost it. This country has lost it. This country has lost Gemmett's Lane. This country may have lost Gemmett's Lane, but Gemmett's Lane was taken away from us by the government. And I cannot be timid or shy about saying that. It is the truth. And it is a regretful truth today. While I speak, it remains a matter of some considerable national regret. I beg your pardon, ma'am. It remains a matter of some considerable national regret that we cannot be more generous in the face of this nobility that springs from this association of persons who have committed themselves with admirable compassion to the care of those who may be in their last days, so that we support in principle the care and the continuing care as a strategic device to protect our fellow citizens in peril. But I will close on that, Your Honor, by saying to you that we remain also tactically divided, that maybe, just maybe, the precise location is inappropriate and the extent of the gift is lacking in generosity. Well, it is not a gift, it is a lease. And in law, we know that there's a difference between a gift and a lease. I would want to give government the credit and assume that the lease will be peppercorn, as we say in law, that it will be so small only as to define itself as a lease, but it will almost be a gift. And that is how the law operates. The law makes a distinction between a gift and a lease. And where the donor intends to be generous, he sets the consideration, that is to say the price for that lease, at such a small figure that it feels almost like a gift. Well, the country may now, on that point, be concerned again that while the arrangement with the association is a lease, in which the continuing commercial relationship between the state and the association, BACA, will continue to be one of commerce, the government still must answer the question of the public. If you're giving the association a lease, or rather, if you're entering into an arrangement with the association that is commercial, that is a lease, why not? Why did you not, as a government, consider a similar arrangement with the entity that plants itself now with a large groundbreaking and opening ceremony as the beneficiary of a gift, not a lease, a gift? And these are questions, I know the government hates criticism, but sometimes you have to face it. And you have to face a public that will now ask, why does this noble body sit in the position of a lessee? That's a legal term, a lessee, the beneficiary of a commercial arrangement called a lease. And another organization, which presumably sits on millions of dollars, US dollars, and dollars of all currencies, why would they be the beneficiary of a gift? There maybe is something rotten in the state of Denmark. We remain strategically united, but tactically divided. We support the compassionate continuing care of those of our citizens, all worthy. Does not matter what is their station in life. Death visits all of us, and we must continue to treat the onset of death with the compassion of which our chaplain spoke this morning in his prayer. That is a continuing concern of this opposition, that the government continues to allocate its resources without rational dispensation. There is something irrational in the allocation of these public resources, and there's no public resource that exceeds the value of land. We are only 166 square miles, I believe. And anytime the state is taking its lands and distributing according to the powers given to it by Chapter 225 of the laws of Barbados, in this small space, we must remain rational. A government must remain rational. A parliament must remain rational, even when the parliament intends to be compassionate. Yes, we are all compassionate, but are we rational? I criticized the government today, not for a lack of compassion, but for a lack of rational conduct in relation to the allocation of the precious resource called land that is disappearing from private ownership. Thank God that BACA will have access to that precious resource, albeit by a commercial lease, when other entities far more powerful are granted by way of gift. Something is wrong. Something remains rotten in the state of Denmark. Please permit me, Your Honor, to express that opinion to which I'm entitled. It is a cognate debate, and I will not expend a lot of your time today, ma'am. As the Honourable Member for St. George South sequentially dealt with the debate, I will now come and take his lead and move on to housing. Now, it is cognate, but it does not mean that one may not compare. The palliative care facility is granted by way of lease. The National Housing Corporation receives a vesting. There's no sin there. If one is to be consistent, I've always argued in here that housing, the National Housing Corporation, has been the custodian of the property and housing rights of people in this country. That had been the noble objective of the National Housing Corporation when it was established many, many years ago, before the birth of any of us in this chamber. The National Housing Corporation brought salvation to people in this country who would not have had a roof, whether by way of lease or by way of purchase. And I hope, it is my sincere hope, that the National Housing Corporation will never be consigned to palliative care. That this housing, this National Housing Corporation, will never be suffocated by any policy of the government. And that was a concern I expressed when the other project emerged. When the other project emerged, and that other project was given lands adjacent to lands given to the National Housing Corporation. You're aware, ma'am, that I speak of hope. And I said then, and I continue to say it because I'm consistent. The chaplain this morning called for integrity as a virtue to be embraced by those of us who find ourselves in these positions, all 30 of us. And integrity is not what it is unless it is marked by consistency of principled thought, consistency of principled action. The question will remain, though, why had it been a vesting of lands, a part to Hope and a part to National Housing Corporation? I felt then, and I still do now, that housing, that any vesting of lands in this country made to any entity for the purpose of public housing or for the public purpose of housing Barbadians must be given to the National Housing Corporation and not to any other corporation, whether it is Hope or Despair. I say again, ma'am, that the National Housing Corporation has been the salvation in this country in terms of housing. It has been a noble project, and it has been a project that was brought to suffocation by events of the last few years. I will not abandon that position. I will not abandon that position. You would expect me, Your Honor, to call the names of the several conurbations across this country that were identified by a progressive government and constructed by a very efficient National Housing Corporation. You expect that sentimentally I would begin with Grisettes and speak of Pinelands and Christchurch West Central would speak of Gall Hill and Silver Hill. And St. Michael Northwest will speak of Deacons. And there are parts of St. Philip. And there's even a small one in St. Andrew. And there's a small one in what we used to call Bayland, now called Bayville. That is the noble record of this National Housing Corporation. It cannot be understated in this country. This country in which people physically remove themselves from the shadow of the plantation and the shadow of the merchant and receive dignified existence under the protection of the National Housing Corporation. That has been the history of housing in this country. That has been the modern history of housing in this country. And I say again, let not the National Housing Corporation be ever consigned to palliative care. This National Housing Corporation must regain its strength, it must regain its breath, and it must regain its mandate. The mandate to house those who are unable to house themselves at small rents. And I heard the Honourable Member for St. George South speak this morning as to the precise nature of this arrangement. I was concerned about that. And when the Honourable Member for St. George South said early in his speech 33 units, I was wondering what would have been the precise nature of the settlement. And the Honourable Member later explained that there would be 33 lots and that the beneficiaries of those conveyances would go to the bank and that they would build their own houses. Obviously, there would be covenants and restrictions, and the quality of house would be controlled by the town planner, the chief town planner. I think they call him a different name these days, but we know to whom we refer. And I observed that with some curiosity. I thought that when the Honourable Member said units, that related itself to the nature of the construction that would be carried on. But the Honourable Member has clarified, and if there was any lack of enthusiasm in the Honourable Member's approach today, maybe, just maybe, he would feel a little disappointed that the housing trust could not be the kind of housing trust that is done according to what I consider the prototype, the best prototype of them all, the West Terrace project. And I always speak of the West Terrace project that was done sometime in the 1980s, in which, as is done today, the lands were vested in the National Housing Corporation, but those beneficiaries of conveyances were not left to the marketplace, to the banks and the builders. That the government at that time, and the Honourable Member would now appreciate that this is not partisan, because I'm identifying this period in the 1980s, early 1980s, and that the government at the time, through the National Housing Corporation, it did have an arrangement in which the National Housing Corporation conveyed those lands to each owner individually, and then there was a separate agreement between the landowner and the builder, but all under the supervision of the National Housing Corporation, that excellent custodian that has never abandoned the aspirations, the property aspirations of the people in this country who need protection. And that is why I say the West Terrace project was perhaps the best prototype for housing development in this country. This one today is different. But I will go on to say that, to complete my description of that prototype called the West Terrace project. So the National Housing Corporation did a conveyance to the owner, to the purchaser. And by separate treaty, by separate agreement, the builder, under the supervision of National Housing Corporation, had a separate agreement with the purchaser. So there were two transactions. Indeed, there were three transactions. National Housing Corporation, by way of conveyance, conveyed the land to the purchaser. The builder, by way of agreement, agreed to build the house for the purchaser. And by separate agreement, a mortgage, which the Honourable Member for St. George South anticipated this morning as well, that person went to his financier. I did not say bank because I think at that time the Barbados Mortgage Finance Corporation was very, very active in these matters. And so you had two state corporations, and that was important because people generally feel better protected with the state. And so you had National Housing Corporation and you had the Barbados Mortgage Finance Company, which was also a state corporation. And the only private treaty was with the builder. And you go to West Terrace today, ma'am, and you see what has been the result of that excellent prototype. Many of those houses don't look now as they looked in the mid-1980s. They have, most of them, been expanded, and most of them have certainly been improved. And I would think that now, those original mortgages in the modest sums, it didn't seem modest then, but if my memory serves me correctly, I think in the 80s, they may have been paying, I don't wish to be wrong on this, I think it could have been around $600 a month, I'm not too sure. May appear to be a modest figure then, but salaries were a lot lower then. But whatever it was modest. Again, you had the state meeting its obligation to protect those who needed protection. Not that they were financially disabled, but they merited this protection. And that is how a progressive society is built. Today, the Honourable Member for St. George South asked the question, and I recorded it, why vest in NHC? And the answer the Honourable Member gives is this. He says, to give good title. I did not quite understand the answer, although I understood the question. But I agree that the vesting is best done in NHC, and I want to urge the Honourable Member for St. George South, and I know that this is not an individual decision, I want to urge the government of this country to continue to use the NHC in these transactions, to abandon other enterprises that have crept into this market. And I'm not going to, for the 100th time, speak of the disaster of hope. I'm not. Everybody in this country knows about that by now. So let us not burden nor bore the country with that sordid tale again. But let us ask this government, to abide by the chaplain's prayer this morning and to, in matters of public leadership, embrace the virtues of integrity, wisdom, and compassion. There's a place for this National Housing Corporation. I expressed the view last year that it was apparently to be suffocated by this government. That is a criticism that I make without apology. I make that criticism without apology. I am pleased that the government is once again turning to this custodian of the people's interests, this National Housing Corporation. But today I ask the question, has government withdrawn from the construction sector? Government used to be involved indirectly, as I said, in the prototype of West Terrace. In this one, I get a sense that government is not directly and certainly not indirectly involved. I listened to the Honourable member very carefully, and it seems that when these 33 conveyances are done, the government also, in terms of its activity in relation to Coverley, is done. And if the words of the Honourable member for St. George South are to mean anything, they can go to their banks, they can go to their finance institutions and ensure that they can attract the wherewithal to construct every one of those 33 units. I regret that we could not have had a continuation of the West Terrace prototype, because if we had continued the West Terrace prototype, not only would we have been enfranchising the citizens of this country whose incomes are modest, whose lifestyles are modest, but who are entitled to ambition. Not only would the government have been enfranchising those persons, but the government would have been guaranteeing activity for the small builders. I hate to use the term small builders, but we know who we mean. Those builders who depend on the vagaries of the market. They will tell you when they get the award of a contract for a house, their priority is to look for another house. That is how the small businesses operate. They'll tell you that. And it isn't to say that they become less concerned with building A's house, but life being what it is for them, while A's house is under construction, they seem to give equal priority to finding a house to be built for B. Perhaps the government, perhaps, just perhaps, the government may not want to appear to be abandoning that sector of builders. This government perhaps could have considered a continued arrangement in which it gives protection not only to purchasers, but it gives some protection also to builders. And I go back to the West Terrace prototype, that when West Terrace was being built, pardon me if my numbers are not accurate, ma'am, but there may have been about 4 or 5 different companies. I could call the names, but I won't. I don't wish to be invidious. There were about 4 or 5 companies, maybe more, I don't know, who were engaged in the construction of those houses. On this occasion, I don't get a sense, having listened to the Honourable member for St. George South, I don't get the impression that this is an arrangement which will continue. All the Honourable member said is that they'll go to their banks and they can make their arrangements. Let me quote, the 33 owners can go to the bank for their mortgages. And it was that terse statement that spoke, I beg your pardon, to government's activity in relation to these lands, so that today's arrangement is a rather blunt arrangement. We vest the lands as a parliament in the NHC. The NHC, obviously, through a vigilant government, and that word vigilant, you may be thinking that that's a euphemism. If you think so, you're right, ma'am. That a vigilant government will know who will be those lucky persons, who will be that lucky 33. But governments are known to be vigilant. And this is not a government that is lacking in vigilance. You are continuing, ma'am. I can read you to accuse me of a euphemism. And if you do, you are correct. And so, again, 33 houses at Corverley on lands that were formerly agricultural. That is interesting. And you know, the government, and I can feel the government advancing to the edge of its chair to accuse the agriculturalists in Barbados of not wanting people to get houses. I can feel the government edging close to the front of its chair to respond to the agriculturalists. And mine must be a voice in defense of the interests, not only of those who require housing, but mine must be a voice in defense of those who believe that there is a rational treatment of the issue of housing and agriculture. That will continue to be a question that this government has to answer. And the government will have to answer the question not with the counter-accusation that the agriculturalists are against people getting houses, but they will have to confront the issue that there are too many plots of precious agricultural land in this country that are being consigned not to housing, but the agriculturalists will say it differently, that are consigned to cement. And when land becomes cement, the dirt is lost forever. And the allied issue is this, that if we claim as a country that we're spending too much foreign exchange, even on our food, if we claim to be a country that is concerned about our food security, we must balance these interests. We must balance the interests of the agriculturalists against the interests of those who build cement. We must. So that it does not sit well to make the bland accusation that if somebody speaks for agriculture, he speaks against housing. It is possible to speak for both. And I will demonstrate to you, ma'am, how it is possible to speak for both. I will say to you, Your Honor, that there are people driving across Barbados every day close to tears when they observe how agricultural land is being treated, from idleness to concrete. That becomes the manner in which the government is treating the land, the precious land, the soil in this country. And when they accuse us of not presenting alternative manifestos, we say to the government that if the government does an audit among existing housing conurbations across this country, from St. Lucie to Christchurch and to St. Philip in the east, and to Bayville, and I say Bayville for a good reason, that this government will discover that there are several vacant lots across this country that there are several dilapidated houses across this country that can accommodate an aggressive housing campaign. So it is not a good argument to say that the agriculturalists are against housing. They're not. The agriculturalists speak for the rational development of land. And the agriculturalists are justified in holding opposition against a trust that represents an incursion against their interests, and not only their commercial interests, but against food security in this country. I address a parliament in which the honourable member for St. Philip South is in his seat. And he will hear me say repeatedly that agriculture in this country is in a perilous state. And that is supported by the central bank report. That the percentage contribution of agriculture to the gross domestic product is in crisis, or it reflects a crisis. 3% is not good enough. It is not good enough. And this is happening while cement continues to be poured on our fertile fields in this country. This is a point that needs to be made, and it is no point answering that accusation with the emotive charge that the agriculturalists are against housing. They are not. Because they too want housing. But we've asked this government, in spite of the accusation that is made abroad, I haven't heard it in here yet, but misguided accusations that are made abroad. And when I say abroad, I mean outside of this place, across Barbados, social media and so on, and in the mainstream media, that we do not present alternative manifestos for housing in this country. The alternative manifesto urges this government to look at the established housing locations in this country, the vast conurbations of housing, and to find that there's room for development. The honourable member for the city is here. And he would not dare to speak differently. And if he does, he meets the condemnation of his constituents. The Orleans is urgently awaiting urban renewal. And there are other parts of Bridgetown and stretching to Greater Bridgetown. I refer to Bayville. And I can go up the coast to Christchurch. There are several lots of land in this country that need attention, and it is not a reinvention of the wheel, because what the UDC and the RDC used to do was precisely that. The UDC and the RDC went into the local communities on the mission of urban renewal and on the issue of rural renewal of the housing stock. That can and must be done if one is to rationalize the use of land in Barbados. As I said earlier, from St. Lucie to Bridgetown to St. Philip in the east along the corridor of Christchurch, and inland, even St. Thomas, ma'am. Your voice is silent today except in the office of presidency of this chamber. But you would be disappointed if I did not bring the issue to bear on the central portions of Barbados. St. Thomas. And how ironic, St. George. There is so much within the existing housing stock that requires the attention of the government, except that this government believes that it is a moment for national applause when you plant cement. on dirt at the expense of this country, at the expense of this country's food security. Let us, ma'am, rebuild our neighborhoods. Let us renew our neighborhoods. Let us rebuild and renew our neighborhoods that have fallen victim to crime. There are a lot of people in this country, good people, and their only burden is the stigma of their address. This government can make those addresses prestigious again. This government can make those addresses prestigious again. Across this energetic St. Michael, this St. Michael used to be known for its energy, and that energy was manifested on the sporting fields, locally and internationally. Almost every Barbados cricket team and football team drew their membership from this energetic place called St. Michael, and that is not any prejudice against the rural portions of the country, because Sir Conrad Hunt came out of St. Andrew. But St. Michael was closer to the action, so to speak. Last week, and this is not to digress, ma'am, we lost one of our good young athletes to crime. That is Barbados's greatest affliction, and I say that in the context of a debate on housing, because when we fail to house our people, we abandon the youth to the scourges of crime, to the stigma of the address that has lost its prestige. And that has been the problem in St. Michael. That has been the problem that stretches into Christchurch, Gall Hill, and Silver Hill. That every noble project, or every project that was originally built by the National Housing Corporation now bears a different image. I urge this government, and if this government is unwilling to do it, another government will have to commit itself to an urban renewal program that will save this country from the scourge of crime within those communities that were once the energetic places in this country. I ask this government to pursue a housing program that meets not only individual ambition, but a housing program that meets the collective interests, the interest that this country will not be a good place unless it is also a peaceful place. And the peace that this country used to enjoy now experiences its violent origins in places that need rehabilitation, that need urban rehabilitation. I say to the Honourable Minister of Housing, member for St. George South, to give serious consideration to a housing mandate that looks not only to the creation of entirely new estates, whether it's 33 houses or 333 houses, and to look back, to look over one's shoulder at those places where it all began under the noble effort of the National Housing Corporation. Look into those places and advance a progressive program for progressive housing in those spaces that now stand as evidence of physical decay, and to consider that that physical decay is allied to social decay, and in some cases, the decay of morale and personal esteem and to consider that we live at a time in a materialist culture in which young people will not feel that they're comely. They will not feel that they're worthy if they emerge from certain addresses. That becomes a mandate of a government. That, in the words of the chaplain this morning, will embrace the virtues of integrity, wisdom, and compassion. Your Honor, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Member for Christchurch East.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I rise to lend my support to this resolution. I had come here with my heart full of joy, in as much as one can have joy while reflecting on palliative care and the provision of hospices. But I came here feeling good that we were doing something good for people who needed it most. I heard my learned friend from St. George South introduce the resolution, and he spoke exceedingly well on it. And I thought to myself, well, perhaps for once, we may actually have some consensus on what is right, what is noble, and what is just. But I underestimated the capacity of the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to create a funeral from a christening. I wish, ma'am, before I get into what it is I have to say, to just address some of his concerns, because based on recent trends, I need to try to answer his concerns quickly while he's in a position to benefit from hearing them. Madam Deputy Speaker, the first issue that was raised by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition was the issue of location. Why there? Why in such close proximity to the airport? I don't know if the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has confined his movements in Christchurch to Christchurch South, but obviously he does not get up as far as Coverley. Where the facility is to be located, Madam Deputy Speaker, while you can see the airport, you can't properly hear the airport. The noise coming from the airport blows to the east. That is to the north of the airport. The noise of planes taking off and landing, if you focus yourself entirely, you may possibly hear it. But it is not something that is likely to disturb residents, even residents at their most delicate. So I urge the Honourable Leader to just pop up there. If he wishes for me to send somebody to meet him to show him where it is, I can have that done. I know he won't come with me, so I wouldn't even waste my breath on that one. But we can perhaps have somebody show him, give him a tour, show him the exact location, what the facility is supposed to look like, where the hospice is going to be, as opposed to where the residential housing is going to be. And they can even show him, Madam Deputy Speaker, the area that is reserved by the hospice for some small agriculture on the scale that can make the hospice possibly self-sufficient in crops, in vegetables, in supplies like that. So that answers the second of his questions, as in why there and not in town. In town, the ability to actually have some sort of fresh crops, herbs, some ground provisions will not actually exist. The Honourable Leader has fixated on that plot of land out by Gemmett's Lane. He's fixated on it to the point where he has to raise it almost every time he speaks, whether or not it has anything whatsoever to do with the discussion at hand or whether it contributes in any way. We heard, Madam Deputy Speaker, about his vision for a 3-story modern facility there that would have, to be honest, at that point in time I was tuning out, but it would have a floor for palliative care, a floor for something else, and then at the bottom, a new and improved A&E department. I don't know, sir, madam, who, if they had a choice, would put a center for palliative care above an A&E department. But you know, this was his vision, and we're all entitled to have our visions, as misguided as they can be. But sometimes you have to read the room, you have to look around. As the Honourable Member for Christchurch, for St. George South was speaking, the persons here who represent Baka were nodding their appreciation, nodding their agreement, nodding his understanding of the factors that influence A, the site, and B, the development, the potential development there. And I wish to acknowledge them, because it is important that those who are affected and those who have a vested interest be here to hear the debate, to hear what is being said, to lend their support, to understand the parameters within which government operates and what is being done in their name and in their interests. And I wish that at some point in time, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition had perhaps cast his eyes to the left to look at the persons who are interested in this facility, to look at the persons on whose behalf we're moving this resolution today, and understand that they were lost when he was speaking. Now, I don't wish to deter him from his vision, his utopic construction, his utopic erection in Jammett's Lane that's entirely in his mind. Madam Deputy Speaker, if we move the hospice facility from there, then he now has another floor to find something else to put in it. He could probably put a licensing authority or something, maybe a psychiatric ward, something else that, you know, that might pique and strike an interest. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition also said that he hopes that the government will not leave Baka to its own devices in funding, and hopes that they will get some assistance from the government. Obviously, ma'am, he did not listen to the presentation by the Honourable Member for St. George South. The Honourable Member for St. George South said the intention was to lease them the land, but the funding will be dependent on donors, dependent on the private sector. The government will play its part via subventions to fund the building and to fund the operation of the center. Now, the Honourable Leader came right after the Honourable Member for St. George South. So I cannot believe that he did not hear what was said. Maybe he wasn't listening, at which point that points to the danger of trying to debate something while actually not listening to the person who spoke, because you're not debating, you're not responding. You came with an agenda and determined, come hell or high water, to subject us to your vitriol. And ma'am, unfortunately I'm saying your because I have to address through you, but I don't mean your vitriol, obviously, ma'am. To subject us to vitriol and ramblings as opposed to touching on the goodness of this resolution. The Honourable Member also said that in his vision, the hospice would be located in an ultra-modern complex. His 3-story, 4-story erection. The hospice will be located within the ultra-modern complex. Madam Deputy Speaker, the hospice is being purpose-built. It is being purpose-built. The land is going to be given, the facility is going to be given. What is there is going to be demolished, and the hospice will get the chance to construct its facility according to the best practices, the best designs, to make it suit for their purpose with their direct intervention. That is the perfect place, madam, for the hospice. Now, we were given a tutorial on leasehold versus freehold, and peppercorn rents and whatnot. I wish from the bottom of my heart just to educate the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. The intention is to rent this facility to the backer at the cost of $1,000 a year. $1,000 a year. That is as peppercorn can be. I not versed in accounting, but $1,000 per year, that's 1,000 divided by 12, that is under $90 a month. It doesn't get more peppercorn than that. So yes, the government is doing its part. We have to charge something to make the transaction legitimately a lease at $90 a month. You can't even rent a room in the same Martindale's Road for $90 a month. Now, I sometimes feel sorry for him, because his nature appears to be such that he cannot even contemplate a win-win situation. The thought, Madam Deputy Speaker, that parties can actually agree on what is best, agree on the arrangement, agree on the construction, agree on the concept, and both sides be happy, is beyond the contemplation of the Leader of the Opposition. Maybe that's why he's there and not here. I had the opportunity, Madam Deputy, to meet with the representatives of Baca because this is my constituency. The constructions of my constituency, the benefits are going to be my constituency. I wanted to know what it was all about. I wanted to understand the concept. I wanted to be able, when I came here, to speak and represent the interests of all, not with any hope of favor, right? But to give everybody an understanding and a fair hearing. Now, I had a most difficult conversation this weekend. It's my father. My father wanted to see me. I went to visit him. And I was expecting, I don't know, those father-son conversations. Love your dad, love your son. That sort of thing. My father wanted to discuss undertakers. He did not want to leave anything to the future. Not that he, to either of our knowledge, he's in imminent danger of dying, but because he thought it was time that we actually had the uncomfortable conversation. That it makes no sense to dodge the inevitable, that it is best that we put our cards on the table and understand what everybody is about. So we sat down and we had that conversation about funeral homes, about undertakers, about arrangements in the event that anybody passes in our family. And I say that to couch the fact that sometimes we have to accept what is inevitable and make the preparations for it. Madam Deputy, what's the difference between a hospice and palliative care? Palliative care, as I understand it, is the care that is given to assist persons who are suffering, who may be suffering from a terminal illness. Hospice care is a part of palliative care, but it is that care that you give to someone who is terminal, where death is pretty much inevitable. I think you're looking at a target of about 6 months. When the person is expected, all things being equal, to pass within 6 months, I think that is hospice care. The question was raised as to why is the facility initially so small? Because a lot of people go to the hospital and they're unable to be admitted because there's no capacity. Why are we aiming at such a small number of persons who might be residents of the facility? And I raised this in our discussion, which is why it's important to have these discussions. And the intention is that this facility really caters for those who are very close to end of life, where death is imminent and immediately foreseeable. that those persons don't have to suffer at home, that the families don't have to be distressed by the fact that they're unable to care for their loved ones in the way that they actually want to. So you are going to naturally get a high turnover because your time in this facility is expected to be short. Chances are, if the model works, we may have others. There may be further development. But for now, we're starting with a small facility. Ma'am, it's interesting how life works. I had this meeting, I think maybe about 3 weeks ago, with Baka. And since I've had that meeting, I've had somebody that I know very well suffer and die at home. And I was talking through the process. I was trying to be supportive of the family, and I was getting a day by day, maybe twice a day updates as to what was going on, that Granny's eyes were turning yellow, that Granny had stopped eating, that these things, and Granny was in pain. And I'm thinking to myself, this is what would have assisted that person. They did not have to be suffering at home with the family feeling powerless to help them. Somebody called me on Saturday, just past Saturday. Their mother had taken a turn for the worse. The mother was at A&E at the hospital. She is terminal. The doctor said there's nothing more we can do for her. You need to take her home. And I know this lady. She's one of my constituents. A dear old, she is like the salt of the earth, a good woman. And her daughter was crying to me on the phone saying, please, can you get the hospital to take her in? Because we just cannot manage anymore. We just cannot manage. And the hospital did not have the room. It didn't have the room. So she went home. Now, is it fair for us to put persons in this situation? When you are taking home somebody who's terminally ill, who's suffering from cancer, and that person is in pain, the doctor may prescribe a drug, morphine or something, a narcotic. And you have to administer that as indicated by the doctor. You are not a trained person. You don't know if mommy is crying and crying, if to give her a little bit more. You always wonder, did I do the best for them in their last moments? A facility such as this takes that pressure off of the family and allows the person to be surrounded by caregivers who can provide the exact support that is needed. People can be comfortable that mommy, my mother, my father, my aunt, my sister, my child has gotten the best care possible to ease their transition from this life into the next. It exists, palliative care exists in some form or fashion in Barbados. It's very expensive. It's very expensive. A lot of people can't afford it. I think the model here is that those who can afford will pay. Insurance would cover some. You can sign over the pension, at which point this brings me to another. I'm sorry that I could not speak and allow the most senior legal mind in here to benefit from what I'm about to say, but maybe he will see on the news. We have in Barbados a facility under the Mental Health Act, receivership under the Mental Health Act, where, quite frankly, people think, get a power of attorney. My mother is getting ill, get a power of attorney, and we can use her bank account to deal with her and whatever. But what people don't realize is that from the time you're unable to revoke a power of attorney, that power of attorney is supposed to die. The efficacy of that power of attorney is supposed to only be valid insofar as the person who gives it is capable of revoking it. So when mommy is suffering from dementia, or they may be at end of life and unable to make proper decisions for themselves, that power of attorney is of no more effect. We can apply to the court under the Mental Health Act for receivership, but that is a process. So I am envisioning that when we start to get into the accepted area of hospice care, then we're actually going to have to relook the legislation or laws as it deals with certain things like that to make it easier if somebody is terminally ill. I'll just wait until the distraction removes itself. Yes, ma'am. I envision that we'd have to relook the legislation that deals with things like palliative care and hospice care, that deals with how we access and how we operate on behalf of somebody who may not be in a position to make decisions for themselves. But we've started the process. We've opened the door. We know where it is that we want to get to. And now, in addition to granting the land, we need to relook all applicable legislation to make sure that the concept is capable of being properly realized legislatively, practically, administratively, to give the best effect for what it is that we're doing. Madam Deputy, this takes me to another point. I think we as well need to relook the certification of death and the pronouncement of death in Barbados. It is a difficult thing for families who have lost a loved one to have to sit down with the loved one dead at home, awaiting the arrival of a particular doctor or doctors. It is a traumatic experience for them. I cast my mind to a particular situation where somebody woke up and found a relative dead in the vehicle outside the house. The engine was still on, and the person was dead in the car. Apparently they came home and they had a heart attack before they could get out of the vehicle. That person found them at 5 o'clock in the morning. They called me at 9 o'clock in the morning to say to me that nobody had come yet. They called the police, and police said, you can turn off the car, but don't trouble the body. At 1 o'clock, they called me. You know by this time what was happening. Somebody came about 3 in the afternoon, and that's after I intervened. Said, do you know what you're doing to these people? But this is because only certain persons, I think maybe 2 or 3, only certain persons in Barbados can actually pronounce death. Madam Deputy, we need to look at that. That is perhaps the hardest thing for a family member, to sit down and look at a body. You can't touch it. You can't open the window. You can't do anything. You have to watch nature and temperature and climate take its toll on that person that you loved. Because we can't get somebody to write on a piece of paper what we all can see has happened, that the person has died. I don't know. I did first aid. Madam Deputy, I was told you check for pulse. If in doubt, you put a mirror underneath the nostril to see if there's any fog from the breath. I did first aid a long time ago, but there are ways, Madam Deputy, that even the uninitiated can tell this person has passed. Any doctor in Barbados, I dare say, can determine whether somebody is alive or they're dead. There are multiple doctors in Barbados, plenty. If we need to agree and designate more, let's designate more. If we need to put structures around what happens after, let's put the structures around what happens after. But this policy, this practice we have, that only 1 or 2 or 3 people can pronounce death, has to stop. It is torture. It is torture for family members. I wasn't planning to go here, but you know what? We're having a discussion about death. We're having a discussion about easing the transition. We're having a discussion about easing the transition for the affected person, for the terminally ill person. Let's talk about easing the transition for the family members as well. Madam Deputy, as an MP, we are exposed to death a lot more often than most people. There are people who support you, and if their family members are sick, they want you to know. And you have to give them the support. I have honestly seen more death than I wish to see. I've seen more death than I wish to see. And we must never underestimate our role in the lives of ordinary Barbadians. What does being an MP mean to somebody? It means you're there to celebrate when the child is born. It means you're there to help them with a house. It means you're there when somebody dies. And just to lighten it ever so slightly in the most morbid way, I remember once, Madam Deputy, I got a phone call from a strong supporter, and he was almost inconsolable on the phone. He got home, and his mother had collapsed, and she was going through spasming and in distress. And he said, MP, because he never calls me anything other than MP, MP, she's gone, mommy's gone, mommy's gone. And I said to him, have you called the ambulance? Mommy's gone, mommy's... Have you called the ambulance? He had not called the ambulance. He said, no, I did not call the ambulance, I'm calling you. So I called the ambulance. And I called a doctor who was close by. And they managed to get there, and mommy was actually not gone. They attended to mommy, and mommy is still with us. That is what we do as MPs. That's the way that we are seen in the lives of some people. That's the care we expected to exert the whole way down the line. So, quite frankly, I would love to be able to see some of our most vulnerable at the transition point in their life have the dignity that they should have. Have the dignity where somebody can take care of you, facilitate your family coming to visit you, but also know that you're getting the best care without actually pulling the rest of your family down with you. Families in Barbados, you have two sides. You have the people who want to drop off the old people at the hospital and leave them there. And then you have the other side who cannot accept that sometimes the best thing to do is actually to turn your distressed family member over to professionals who can care for them in a way that you can't. Some of us feel that we are abandoning our family if we put them in a care facility. Some of us feel we're abandoning our family if we're not there for them. But to be honest, I can't think of any mother who would want to see their child suffer in the way that they're suffering at their passing. So I sum this all up to say, this is a good thing. I have dwelt a lot on the hospice aspect because the reality, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that the housing speaks for itself. I'm glad for the 33 housing solutions in Christchurch. I'm very glad for it. I'm familiar with the piece of land. That land was derelict for a long time. It used to be a hive of activity. They used to host weddings and things out there. Nothing has been done with it. The pool had been collecting water and harboring mosquitoes. The thing was overgrown, so it was causing rodent issues for the other people in Corvallis. So I am glad that we are actually now doing something with that. It makes me, I don't care if it used to be agricultural land or if it's agricultural land, right? It was not being farmed. So agricultural land that is not under cultivation and nobody wants to cultivate it is of no use to keep calling it agricultural land. And I asked the Honourable Minister of Agriculture as well, how big an issue is this? He said, there are 28,000 acres of agricultural land in Barbados, more than we can actually farm. He then made a point to me that modern farming requires a lot less land than old-time farming. We do hydroponics, we do vertical farming, we do other things. The Honourable Leader of Opposition keeps getting stuck on this point that we're fertilizing the soil with cement. We have to balance competing interests. The reality is we have a shortage of housing in Barbados. We have to provide houses for people to live. We have to provide reasonable solutions that the most vulnerable and those in a certain bracket can actually have the chance to own a piece of the rock. We have to balance that with the needs for agriculture. And my friend said there is more than enough agricultural land left in Barbados to serve our purposes. We do not have the luxury of being myopic, narrow-minded, and effectively being a one-trick pony like others in here. We have to manage for everybody in Barbados. So, in summary, my eyes have been opened. I had never thought fully about hospice care, I'll be honest. Never thought fully about hospice care. But it is amazing that since I've had that discussion and all my questions were answered, that in the short time since I have seen practical examples of persons who could have used hospice care to ease the transition, who could use it now to save everybody from being distressed, and even the terminally ill from feeling guilty as to what the rest of the family is going through in their name. And as I said, with respect to the units, the residential units, it's a no-brainer. So, taking all that into consideration, I'm glad that BACA took its time to come and explain to me what it was all about. I'm glad that they're using their own initiative to source funding for the development of a purpose-built center and for the development of programs geared at easing the transition and providing care for those at the last stage of their life. I honestly could not see that there could be any objection to this. But as I said, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition never ever ceases to amaze me. But let us not turn a christening into a funeral. I support this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to support this resolution. The Honourable Member for St. George South for the presentation. It is a cognate debate, obviously primarily because the land that we are leasing to BACA is also the subject of a larger parcel of land for which we are seeking to vest the entire parcel of land in the National Housing Corporation for the purpose of housing development. I too, like my colleague from Christchurch East, was a little baffled by the Leader of the Opposition, Honourable Member for Christchurch South's presentation, because I was a bit concerned that I wasn't sure if he was actually supporting the resolution at one point, or whether the focus was more on, as he put it, the location of the facility for the palliative care facility. And as he continued to talk about housing development, it then became clear that there is such a divide, certainly between this administration and certainly the Democratic Labour Party administration, as it relates to the approach to not only housing development, but development of the country as a whole. As it relates to housing development, it is clear that the member for Christchurch South appears to be stuck in a colonial past, where the focus for him seems only to be on one entity, a single entity created by government being responsible for the development and the build-out of housing. It is clear that he has not collided with the productive ways in which other countries globally have been able to address housing, whether through the joint venture relationships or whether creating other entities to be able to better manage the housing stock and certainly the products in terms of what people are able to afford, whether to rent or whether to be able to obtain a mortgage in order to be able to have proper accommodation. And it's clear that that divide is what the Honourable Member perhaps needed to be reminded of in relation to the history of his own administration, because I certainly sat in this place at a time when there were several housing projects that were alluded to by the then administration, which never saw the light of day in some cases, or in some cases, when we came to office in 2018, we were burdened with that responsibility of being able to complete a number of those housing projects. What we are on all fours with the then administration on is that housing is a priority. But our approach as a government has been one where we have been able to find different models, and particularly being able to use renewable energy sources to be able to lower the costs for, in particular, low-income persons to be able to have housing accommodation that does not cost an arm and a leg. It goes back from a basic principle of being able to ensure that everybody is able to own a little piece of this beautiful rock, that Barbadians can aspire, the young boys and girls of this country, to be able to own their own home, to own their own piece of land someday, and to be able to build out for themselves and certainly for their families, something which they are proud of being able to call their own. So as I said, it is clear that we are divided on these things, and that instead of the leader of the opposition supporting the bill in its entirety, he had to take the opportunity to throw a couple pot shots. But I will throw a couple back, Madam Deputy Speaker, because as I said, I recall what we have had to do in relation to the housing program. I remember sitting in the opposition on that side, right behind you, Honourable Member for St. James North, and hearing about the constant project in St. George, which we came to office and we had to spend, I think, significant sums to be able to complete over 60 houses that had been left by the then administration. Madam Deputy Speaker, you would also recall the parish land projects, where we've been able to put a few people in the houses, but it came at a substantial investment by this administration to be able to do repairs, renovations, retrofits, in some places take down the entire existing structure and have to rebuild the structure to be able to allow ordinary Barbadians to own a piece of the rock. I remember the days of hearing about Pickering projects down in St. Lucie, where they were going to develop all types of housing for low-income families, which never materialized. And I can go on and on about the promises that have been made by the last administration regarding the development of housing. Now, I take housing very serious. Perhaps the only thing that the leader of the opposition and I may agree on in terms of what he presented is that I do feel that there's a very causal link between the type of accommodation people live in, very overcrowded conditions, and the link to crime. And whenever I stand in this place, I speak to the issue of easing the densely populated nature of communities, because the community I represent in particular, but also the ones that I see as I drive across the length and breadth of this country, there are people who are living in very cramped conditions. And not that people have not come from cramped conditions and succeeded, but there are some people, because of the conditions in which they live, compounded by other social factors, tend to find themselves reverting to a life of crime because of the circumstances in which they find themselves. And therefore, I can only support any resolution that is brought to this chamber that perhaps gives a further opportunity for people to aspire to the goal of home ownership, but also where we are seeking to be able to include persons in the process of home ownership, so that we can build out future generations of homeowners. Now, I know the Coverley project and the Coverley name, perhaps, I remember being on that side as well at the time, lent itself to a lot of discourse. I remember the Honourable Member for St. James Central, when the housing project was first being built out, the concerns regarding that the then administration said that the project was for low-income persons. But I am not aware that the project that I see today is in any way a low-income people project. And I want to remind the Honourable Member of that time, because I certainly, as part of this administration, I am very focused that we must build for persons who are most vulnerable, that in some cases we must subsidize low-income housing, and that we must not use housing as a political football to enrich the coffers of some, while others in our society continue to suffer as a result of not having proper accommodation for them and their families. So I have no difficulty with the acquisition as being presented by the Honourable Member for St. George South. The intention to be able to have 33 new homeowners in this country, I think is a wise one. I don't get the impression it is low-income housing, but I do know that the government's entire program is intended to carve out a number of different types of programs that would facilitate for us being able to house as many people as we possibly can. And I think it's just for that reason that I support what the honourable member is seeking to do here. Certainly in the Lower Bernese area, which is directly impacting my own constituency. The honourable member, I know when he's closing, will probably also update, but I continue to remain in contact with him on a regular basis because the Lower Bernese project under this administration was intended to take 20 acres out of 40 acres of the housing stock, which was acquired by way of a private arrangement with a landowner through planning gains to be able to allow the constituency, certainly of St. Michael's Southeast and the surrounding areas, to benefit from a project that would ease the dense nature of, in particular, the areas of Golden Rock in the Pinelands community. And I'm grateful that we have not only made the pronouncement, but we have worked as an administration year after year to try to get the designs completed, to be able to ensure that we can now get to the stage where we can put in the roads. I'm grateful to the Ministry of Housing as well for engaging in a social survey of within the constituency to be able to identify the greatest needs, because we have a lot of people have been in the community of St. Michael's Southeast who are on a waiting list for housing. But we have to obviously, as we have done as a government since coming to office, ensure that we are able to prioritize the persons with the greatest needs within our society. So I look forward to that project. I'm told that the road should be going in rather shortly, that now that the social surveys are completed and they have the assessments of the number of persons requiring housing, that they are now at the stage where they can start to complete their designs. And I believe before the end of this year, the designs are finished. And my apologies, the designs are finished. So they are moving quickly. And that by the end of this year, we should start to see the beginning of construction of that project in the Lower Bernese area. As it relates to the other resolution, Madam Deputy Speaker, which relates to the Barbados Association for Cancer Advocacy being able to lease the property, which was the old plantation house in the Coverley area, I too support this resolution, and I do so perhaps more of a personal standpoint than I believe anybody else in this space may be able to speak to. When you have faced a diagnosis of cancer, when you face anything which is life-threatening, I believe that you have a different perspective on not just life, but you have a different perspective on death as well. And in 2018, when I would have made it clear to the country and certainly to the rest of the world, my own diagnosis at the time, it made me certainly reflect not on just what I had to do in the months which followed, but certainly in relation to my own mortality as well. It is a place that when you find yourself in that situation, having to think about those things in terms of the future, I tell people that I live my life completely different than I have ever lived before, and certainly I think I live my life and my perspective on life is completely different than certainly maybe some of my colleagues as well, because unless you've walked that road, you've walked that journey, you do not see life in the same way. So today I'm very proud of BACA for this step. This was a manifesto promised by the Barbados Labour Party. We recognize when we were coming to office from a number of our rubbing shoulders, but also from our engagement with the public, that this was a need to be able to provide not only hospice facilities, but also palliative care facilities as a part of what we consider to be the human rights of Barbadians. It is something that is widely accepted globally. People have options in terms of from cradle to grave, and I think that perhaps it has been too long in coming in the Barbadian healthcare landscape to be able to see something of this nature on the horizon for the benefit of not just Barbadians who have money, but Barbadians who certainly do not have money, and to have a place where people and their families can certainly be able to go during the last days of life. So I believe that this is the fulfillment of not only the vision in terms of what we would have wanted to see, but with the help of the private sector, and certainly persons who, even within the organization, they're not persons who have no nexus to cancer, but they are persons who themselves have also been through and walked the road as well, and I think they too understand the concerns of families. I have had the, I would say, I don't want to say it's the opportunity, but I've had perhaps a distinct honor in many cases of being the person that people often call, just as my colleague for Christchurch East said, as a politician, you play a different role than most other people do. You're often that person that people call when they get a diagnosis that is going to lead to them dying. I'm often speaking about people who reach the stage 4 of cancer, for instance. And it is painful to watch the deterioration of people's conditions when they are at that late stage of their diagnosis. It is equally difficult to see the challenges that people face as it relates to the financial implications of that stage as well, of their life, exiting their life and into death as well. Because if you have to be sent home from the hospital, oftentimes, depending on your social status, the challenge comes that the house has to be retrofitted. Particularly if you were living upstairs, you have to come downstairs. Sometimes the bathrooms are not downstairs on one level, so sometimes people have to have the resources and the ability to be able to retrofit their spaces to make it accommodating for their loved ones. And then comes the price of the oxygen tanks. It comes the cost of the Pampers, the adult Pampers that are required, the blue bed sheets that sometimes you have to use as well because it becomes difficult in the later stages to be able to turn people. You also have the cost of the hospital beds, the mechanized beds that are almost 2,000 US. And if you purchase them overseas, they may be a little bit less. But these are the realities of families having to grapple with the news that a loved one is at those late stages. Obviously, the hospital tries its best at times to be able to allow people to remain in the institution. But they too, and I suspect the Honourable Minister will also speak to it in terms of the challenges that the hospital has, where because families cannot cope, they often turn their backs on their loved ones. And you have a lot of people in the hospital who are not waiting for an operation necessarily, but they're taking up a bed because there is no place for them to go. The fact that this particular lease lends itself to a facility that at least will start with 14 people to be able to allow for families and loved ones to be able to be in a space to be cared for by health professionals, I think is certainly a welcome step in our healthcare system. I am a firm believer that while it starts at 14, I think the private sector, I'm sure once you make that step, oftentimes the private sector will come on board to assist. I have found too in my interaction with people overseas that love Barbados, people who have been in the healthcare profession, that once we reach out to people in the diaspora, that there is a sense of love for this country and for the build-out and development of this country, where I can certainly see that a facility such as this should be able in the external markets to be able to speak to that diaspora and to the people that have made Barbados their home to assist in the build-out of this facility. I don't think we need to stop at the 14. I think the potential is there to do more. And this administration, by way of this particular lease, has not only granted this house and this property to Baka, but there are other lands on the property that will allow for the future build-out and the development. So I think this is just the beginning. The Leader of the Opposition would have questioned the location, and again, I suspect that that is perhaps more mischievous than anything, because I think we also recognize that a facility such as this also has to earn. It cannot be dependent on the government of Barbados for a subsidy. It cannot be cap in hand to the private sector all the time. And its location actually near the airport is actually quite a blessing because it allows for it to do two things. One, be able to earn foreign exchange, no doubt, from people who may have to fly in to have medical care and attention at our facilities, but then may need a place to be able to house their loved ones because they may not be able to travel back to their country of origin. That in turn allows for the facility to be able to earn a revenue, while at the same time being able, as we do already in relation to our geriatric facilities, being able to allow ordinary Barbadians who may be able to afford it to be able to pay perhaps a nominal amount to be able to house their loved ones there in their latter years of life. And equally, as we do, we subsidize people who can't afford it at all, because that is the nature of the government that we have, where we subsidize people in the geriatric hospitals, in the nursing care facilities, to be able to allow persons to be cared for and to be looked after in their older years. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, you're well aware that our population is aging, and these are real issues, these are burning issues that are affecting ordinary Barbadians. I am a firm believer too that community care, and I said it in the estimates and I will continue to repeat it, that we need to integrate into the landscape of healthcare treatment the opportunity for people in communities who are trained and who are interested in looking after the elderly to be able to allow elderly people to remain in place as well. There are different tiers that we must continue to focus on. Palliative care is but one. But I believe that we have a responsibility, particularly in our densely populated communities, to be able to find ways to transition and to transform locations, whether it's housing or old buildings, to be able to allow for people in communities to be able to retrofit spaces. I have several people in St. Michael's Southeast, Madam Deputy Speaker, who don't have these types of healthcare facilities, but they have opened up their homes to elderly persons. There are people who will drop off an elderly mother or an elderly grandmother for someone to be able to look after them. All they need is to be able to have the assistance, to be a structure to be put in place to allow them to be able to put a ramp to get into their houses. They may need the assistance with the safety bars to be able to, if the persons need to take a shower, to make sure that the shower meets the conditions and the standards for the elderly person to be to have a bath and to be cared for. There are simple things that we can do as an interim measure while facilities such as this are built out. I think oftentimes we spend so much time focusing on the big picture things, but we fail to recognize that Barbadians across the island are already engaged in looking after people. Madam Deputy, you are perhaps one of the persons that I know that has cared for more people in certainly my political career than most. Whether family or people in the neighborhood, I am well familiar with the work that you have done caring for the elderly. And short of getting an award for it, I know that your blessings are going to be many whenever that time comes. And I know that many of us will make sure that we look after you as well. But the reality is that there's another side there are two other perspectives that I want to bring to this discussion this morning. And one is the perspective that we raise our children to get older and to leave home, to leave the nest, to be able to build their families and to get an opportunity in terms of a job. But we rarely discuss the issue of aging, and we rarely discuss the issue of getting sick and ill health and preparing for death. It is not something that we like to talk about, which is why the Honourable Member for Christchurch East can say that these discussions are things that he's now having perhaps with his father. But the reality is that all of us in this chamber, in some form or fashion, are facing these issues in relation to our own loved ones as well. So we get it. We relate very well, I think, in terms of our understanding of what the general population is facing, because we are dealing with it. I've been open about my mother being in a nursing home, and I look after my elderly father, who's at 84 years old. So we get it in terms of the challenges that the public faces, but we also recognize that we have a responsibility to allow people to breathe a little easier, because they may not all have the resources that everybody else has available to them as well. But there's an issue that we don't like to talk about as Barbadians, and it is being able to prepare for that stage. Some people will prepare by way of the funeral arrangements and just determining the undertaker. But people don't often talk about making a will. They don't talk about being able to prepare themselves for, you know, getting sick. You could be going along well, you get a stroke, at the end of the day, you don't have all of the cognitive functions, and therefore you're then not in a position to be able to go into a lawyer's office to be able to have something drafted. These are conversations that we need to have more, and it's not to bring a level of morbidity to the space, but it is really to get real about the realities now of what each of us are facing as we encounter the aging population in our communities and as we interface with people on a daily basis. Enough people are not taking into account how they transition. And what we find is oftentimes there is confusion in the families, not just in terms of who is going to pay the bill at the funeral home, but there's confusion in relation to the estate. Who is going, you know, a couple people are living in the household, who is going to take responsibility? And I urge people, Barbadians, to, again, seek out the advice, but equally, I think our lawyers need to step up and certainly be able to create the types of clinics that allow people to have the options presented to them as to what some of those options are. The Honourable Minister of Housing and member for St. George South is well aware that, particularly in the housing areas, this is a perennial problem, whereby because of the lack of conveyances in some of the housing estates, people are not able to properly plan their future. And while they may have the name of a person who was living in the house, a son, a daughter, a neighbor was living inside of the house, the reality is that when they die, and their name may be the only name on the documents at housing, sometimes the families struggle to be able to get the appropriate documentation, whether it's letters of administration in most cases, to be able to ensure that they can go forward. There is a cost for taking out letters of administration. Let us not fool ourselves. It is the correct legal mechanism for which, if you die without making a will, that you must go forward to the courts in order to be able to have the paperwork sorted so that your families can be clear in their mind who is going to own the property. But there is another reality that I feel government must look to, and perhaps in the Ministry of Housing, we need to devise a way to be able to assist families in clearing up these estate matters so that people, once that is out of the way, estates can be divided. People can decide who is going to get the house, who is going to move out of the house. Do they need to go and borrow money in order to be able to retrofit the house so everybody can live comfortably? But I don't think that in a modern day Barbados that we can continue to ignore these issues, particularly in relation to the housing estates. It is causing endless confusion. It is causing endless tensions. And we are finding people having to, you know, again, we wonder why people are squatting, why people are taking up Crown state lands, and these are the reasons. But we as a government have to find the mechanisms to be able to make it a bit simpler for people, not just while they are living, to be able to address these issues, but also to make the process simplified when persons actually die and the families have now to come together to be able to sort out the estate matters. So I know that the Honourable Member for St. George South always listens to me, and I know that he will follow suit in terms of addressing these issues, and I know he knows that I'm going to remind him that the title deeds and the issues in relation to the housing estates must continue to be a priority, because again, this creates an unnecessary confusion and tension in already densely populated communities. The other issue, though, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I would wish to speak to briefly as well, is that while we speak about the nearing of death, the transition to death in relation to palliative care, we also need to talk about the life that we are living as well. And I say that in the context of the healthcare system, because it is important that while we are talking about what happens when you're on your way out, that you are also, as not only government, but the healthcare systems and all of us in this space, being able to speak about the things that are important or should be important to people while they are living. The statistics that we hear, the 86-point-something% of persons who will die from chronic non-communicable diseases, must be a problem to each and every one of us. It cannot just be a statistic that is somewhere floating around in the atmosphere that we are proud in spouting when we get up to speak to talk about chronic non-communicable diseases. We are seeing people who are struggling with their health. We are seeing the burden that is plaguing our healthcare system as a result of people not being able to cope. We all accept that we have come from a slave and a colonial society where sugar has been the order of the day. We accept that the practices that happened during that period, some of them have hung over to this period, and that people continue to eat badly and to drink badly. And I don't look at you, Honourable Member for St. James, nor for any other reason than that to say that you are one that has listened, because during the by-election you made sure you put down the water. You took up the water and you put down the soft drinks, right? And I feel very strongly that our message must be one that while we talk about palliative care, we have to talk about the practices, the way people live presently. Because if we are not talking prevention, then we're going to continue to talk about the statistics of the people who are going to die from chronic non-communicable diseases. I would like us as a country to get to the point where we talk about how many people we saved. Not how many people are on the waiting list at the hospital. Not how many people are going to die in a year from a particular disease. But let us talk more about the efforts that are being made, whether it is in relation to the National Nutrition Policy, whether it is gradually stamping out the amount of sugar content and added sugars that our people are using that have become so acceptable that people feel that it is the lifeline that they hold on to. Let us start to talk about, from the agricultural perspective, encouraging people to grow more of what they eat and to eat what they grow, and not just simply use it as catchy taglines, but each of us have a responsibility as leaders to also live what we are saying to the population. You can't just tell people you must eat this and you must eat that, but we are not making the things either affordable or we're not making the things accessible to people to be able to help them make those decisions. So I would like to see more of the programs which not just tell you to eat healthy, but tell you how on a limited budget you should be, what are the things that you should be spending on a limited budget. Many of us give people a voucher, sometimes to help them ease their living conditions. We give them a voucher for $150 sometimes, $200, $100, whatever it is. How many people stop to ask, what are you buying with this? What are you buying with this? And equally, what can this buy? Because if it can only buy the things that are sugary, the snacks that are the wrong snacks for to be consumed by our young people, then all we are doing is becoming a part of the problem, because we are helping to facilitate the purchase of the things that our people should not be eating. So I can tell you straight, I don't give unless I have the conversation. Every child that I interact with in my constituency knows that if Auntie Santia gives you money to buy something, a snack, I ask you which snack you're going to buy. And it starts there, till eventually the children know they're either going to say they're going sometimes for a granola bar, they're going for a pack of nuts, they're going for fruits or something which they know is healthy. It is not to say that we start to eliminate all things that are bad for you, but people have to start somewhere to be able to minimize the challenges that are likely to come from making bad decisions. So I don't want a discussion as today to be revolving around the journey to death without a discussion on the journey of life and the importance of making sure that we do the things now to make sure that people take control of their health. Now that brings me to my final concern, which is that when we talk about this issue of life and the journey of life, I have been advocating for a linear accelerator for cancer patients in this country for the last year. I have done so because I, more than I think, again, anybody else in this room and elsewhere, has had to listen to the people calling me early on a morning, late at night, and saying, DPM, we can't get to use either the current cobalt machine, or we cannot get the assistance to be able to get out of Barbados to be able to get the radiation done outside. We have an old cobalt machine. which I think everybody has agreed it has served its purpose, and we needed to move to a linear accelerator. We have been able to purchase the accelerator. But my concern still remains, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there are several people day by day that are being diagnosed with cancer and other ailments that require you to have radiation. And we have not yet been able to have the benefit of the linear accelerator installed at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. I am sure when the Honourable Minister speaks, because he and I have spoken about this before, and I've told him I don't surprise anybody in this house. I let him know what I'm going to say. But I have an obligation, regardless of the position that I hold, to the people that have died, to the people that are still awaiting treatment in this country at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, the people who are still waiting to be able to access health care out of this country, to be able to ask the questions in this place, and to be able to have those answers given to those people. Because they are on a journey of life, and if we are not careful, they will be on their journey to death before they get to at least enjoy a few moments, a few more months, a few more weeks of life before they have to take advantage of a palliative care facility. So I ask it in that context, Madam Deputy Speaker, out of concern for us making sure that not only do we purchase the equipment, but that we install and we get operational any equipment. It could be the linear accelerator, it could be anything else that we are purchasing to improve healthcare. Because our record as a government is clear, that we have spent more in this country improving the operations of healthcare. We still have a long way to go in terms of the delivery, because having the services is one thing. But I will stand here in this place and anywhere and tell you that based on the complaints, we still have a responsibility to the people of this country to reduce the waiting times, to reduce the times that people wait for surgeries, because that continues to be a bugbear for Barbadians who have no choice but to use the system. I've had people call me recently who were diagnosed with cancer, who have to go to the hospital, and they're concerned that, you know, the length of time it takes for the chemotherapy to be administered takes a long time. So when I speak of the journey of life, I speak of it from a perspective that these are the realities that we are facing, and that every day that we take longer to be able to make sure that equipment is functional, that we correct the procedures within the hospitals and the polyclinics, is a day that people lose of their life. I am fortunate and I bless, I thank God every single day, because He is the giver of life, for being able to give me the opportunity. I do not know how long I have, but what I know is that my perspective is different from most because of the journey I have walked. And I understand how important it is to be able to preserve life. And I therefore, as I said, I speak on behalf of those who have died, who did not have access to the linear accelerator, to those who have not been able to get to the healthcare facilities outside of Barbados. I speak on behalf of the ones who have been recently diagnosed and are trying to figure out their way in this muddled system as to how it is that they're going to get the quality of care that they need to, because they may not be able to afford it. So I give food for thought, perhaps, to all who have ears, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this journey that we have been on as a government, that we never take the eye off the ball as to why we have come here. And we never forget the people who have sent us here and our responsibility to deliver to those persons. Many of these people do not have insurance. Many of these people will never have insurance, because once you are diagnosed with a number of these illnesses, your ability to get the insurance is also compromised. Let's be fair. So we are dealing with double whammies, because we have to make sure that we understand the urgency. I don't just grumble because I have nothing better to do with my time on this issue. I grumble and I agitate for this because it is near and it is dear to my heart, and it could happen to any one of us. It could happen to anybody that is close to us, that we love and we care for, or that we represent. Urgency must be the order of the day. And I therefore want to again commend the Honourable Minister on these two resolutions, and to say to you that I await the works that have been promised, and certainly the continued build-out of the housing sector in Barbados, and to the Minister of Health as well, to ensure that you are able to answer the questions appropriately and to give some comfort to the Barbadians out there who are trying to navigate the system. Again, I want to commend BACA and to encourage you as well to be a part with the healthcare facilities of being able to train people in how to deal with palliative care, because it doesn't have to just be in the facility, but it may also be that we're starting to engender the confidence in our elderly care programs that people are actually specialized in this area, that they can go into homes, they can go into communities to be able to deliver on the palliative care and hospice care mandate of this administration. And with those few words, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am obliged.
Honourable Member Michael.
Madam Chair, thank you very much for allowing me to follow protocol. And I know that you always stick in a rigid way to the rules of the House, and you did not at this time even divert from those kind of standards that you normally promote and advocate. First of all, I speak firsthand on marginal issues that relate to the poor. And I say firsthand because I too, over 10 years ago, the doctor diagnosed me with cancer. And, you know, as usual, many people prayed for Pressy to die. Some even went to look for me in the hospital and wished me well, but they went home and prayed that I die. So I also know how people behave. And even when I was in the hospital, people were calling because I think some very popular figure at that specific moment in history, that person died, and they say that, and Pressy died the same day too. And I think you can remember well, when I came out of the hospital, and I was back on my feet, I made sure that I picked one of the best theme songs for that general election called Bury Alive. Man. So I believe that equally as legitimate in terms of speaking firsthand on my personal experience. And for quite a long time, I discovered that debates drift away from some of the challenges that people in poverty face, whether the challenges in health, economic matters, social matters. And although some of these people, every now and then, will babble some sentiment about the interests and the challenges of poor people, I listen, but I don't always believe, even when they speak with a tone of sincerity and commitment, I don't really believe them, because I also understand the dramaturgical approach to the politics of Barbados. But I think this is significant enough that anyone with a social conscience would be very concerned and would pay salute to the ministry that has put this one on the table in these chambers. When I first saw the bill and I heard about overlay, I said, oh my God. what is this about Coverley? Because I didn't even recognize that they had more land outside the massive housing project that was constructed at Coverley by one specific character in Barbados. And I was very concerned. Ma'am, I am responsible for social transformation and economic enfranchisement. So I was very concerned. Well, this is a greater effort now for the collective strengthening of the wealth of a specific type in the society. But I then read the document and recognized that this was a humane effort to do something for people who, in this society, sometimes are over the age, sometimes of 50. And this is a funny society too. There was a time when this government was talking a lot about intergenerational development. And then the word was relegated to the back burner. And then you start hearing youth. And then you start saying that the youth seem to be something wrong with the youth, and wondering if the youth, if somebody cursed, if some divine power cursed the youth. Then you say that the youth is the alternative. So I know that there's lots of ambiguity in terms of seeking clear thought on the philosophical moorings that should be applied even when we're introducing social and economic legislation in this country, ma'am. Well, this is a humane type. But I believe that in addition to what was highlighted in terms of a paradigm that we once put in place at West Terrace, where NHC took on the responsibility after the lands was transferred to NHC. Because in many cases, lands are transferred from the Ministry of Housing to the National Housing Corporation, two different legal entities. And then the board at National Housing Corporation usually meet and decide on what model they're going to use in terms of after the land is transferred, is the state going to take the responsibility, or is the private sector going to take the responsibility? I would hope that, as the leader of the opposition said, and this is no discussion that existed prior to me coming in here, or even when it was in here with leader of the opposition, I talk truth. I would hope that I see a program where small black contractors who went to the vocational training board and who went to the Polytechnic will be given an opportunity to see the benefits of the training which they have had, rather than going cap in hand begging for a job among the big contractors. I would like these men to even reach a stage where they are not only seen as artisans, but also entrepreneurs within the business market itself in Barbados. I would like to see that. So it is not exactly like the leader of the opposition said, though I believe that that consideration has to be put on the table for deep, serious discussion, because there was a time when there was some bogus view that we can construct buildings for commercial purposes at NHC, and there was also another view that we can build middle-class homes or middle-income homes, which one middle-income homes for middle-class people is almost synonymous with saying that you're going to build middle-income houses itself. And that the profit margin, which was an idea that was so far-fetched that I could not believe what I was hearing from the person who was speaking to me at the time. We will get profit from middle-class homes that we sell in order to boost a working class housing program. It was the most confused, naughty theory that I've ever heard. So I would love to see that we get back to a stage where we build middle-class homes. Now, working-class homes for our people, and not by the Chinese. If we have to get Chinese money, and we have to conform to the things that Chinese do, something going wrong. We are going off track. There's too much evidence. Too much evidence in Barbados of Chinese ripping off the state, and as a consequence, producing inferior housing for working class people. I don't want to give you the empirical evidence to support it, because I become the most sinister individual when I speak truth on these issues. And I would not say it because I don't want the truth to overshadow the importance of the point that I want to make. I am not one of those people who would point my hands at the minister either, because I am not that foolish. I know what I've seen. I know what I have seen, and I know what I know. And I know I paid prices for many of the things that I know are true. And I found myself here on what is called the backbench, some derogatory term for the description of legitimate persons who the people sent to Parliament in this country. I have also been threatened, madam, on many different economic and social issues, on the premature nature of my political survival, because I spoke the truth on these issues. A minister of housing, I confess you are my friend. I am also restrained because of the loyalty of that friendship. But I also know that, and I always urge you, when you are doing things that you know are correct, do not be restrained or constrained by being institutionalized. Because ultimately, you will pay the price. Some people will survive. There'll be a greater duration period of life in this parliament by the institution than you as an individual would receive. I've seen Elby Buffett walk the street. I have seen Joe Edgell. I have seen Lionel Cry, ministers of housing. I've seen them all. I have seen them in a state of mind after rain suits here. I've seen them in a physical shape where they hardly had a good shirt on. So I just tell you that, and I hope you will try to create a mental construct that gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. But I'm not going to go so wide. And I hope I have not gone beyond what I intended to do. But there are some institutions in this country that I believe that the Ministry of Housing and the administrative staff of the Ministry of Housing and the RUDC ought to make contact with. There's no institution in this country that has more outside the commercial, and I'm not even sure if that body is not a commercial entity too, outside the commercial entities that own enough space at Coverley There's no institution that owns more land in this country than the Church of England. Through the Cosington Trust, they have land that goes back to the 17th century, that stretches from the back of that building on the eastern side. And if you keep looking over and over, you will believe that that piece of land touched the borders of Cairo in Egypt. Poor people in this country need land. That is what I really came here to say. The other part of it is icing, cosmetics of the discussion. The Church of England, who continue to retreat from the reparation program and sincere discussions, own thousands of acres of land across St. John and St. George, Drax too, and some of the royal affiliates too, that the lands are not used for any agricultural purposes. But governments are not as muscular as they ought to be in asserting themselves and not using a compulsory acquisition for stolen lands. We don't want no compulsory. Look, this is a moral issue. It's also a sensible issue in terms of equity and good governance. A few years ago, and recently too, I just said it by the way, this form of subterfuge that occurred, but a few years ago, we approached that Cosington Trust in St. John to work with us on a poverty alleviation program. In terms of even subdividing parts of that land, although it's in the trust, I heard, subdividing parts of that land so that poor black people in distress would have access to the utilization of the land at Cosington College. The demand for housing is very, very severe. Every morning in this country. As I say, this is just one strand of the problems of the marginalized people in this country. And I say there are persons who will need that land for respite care. They will need that land for just because they got large families, they have some money, and they will love land to do things. The church up there, Cosington College, the first institution of tertiary education in Barbados, owes a debt to the poor people of this country. And if they are as benevolent as they state they are, how can you have so much reports from so much international agencies year in and year out talking about the state of poverty and homeless people, and it does not touch the conscience of the Church of England? Let us take the cowboy horn, approach them, ask them to make a collaborative effort in a partnership between the NHC, the UDC, or the RDC, which, but I can't remember the new configurations, right? RUDC. RUDC. Let us approach them and see what they can do. Let us hear, look, we're discussing these old structures about whether they're leasing land, selling land, whether we're using the compulsory acquisition. You stole the land. At least you have a social and moral responsibility to give back some of the land until final negotiations. It will come. You can hide for many years. The concept of reparation stands. But just like you did in recent times, refuse to give the $18 million or pounds that you said you were going to give to the state to help with the development of the same estate. You said you must manage the estate yourselves. After you commit crime, the criminals now want to manage the money that they owe to the victims. Tell me which law court you ever see with a model like that. You do something that is wrong, yes, so international bodies indicate that slavery is a crime against humanity. They say that they must manage it. They must hold the funds. But I ask, but in case any of these lands are defected, patent or latent, but we can identify them, would you be prepared to give an alternative piece of land for a house spot? The answer was no. This government in this post-Republican period must take radical stands in order to transform this country at the level which the people expect from any government that reached the level of being the holding Republican status. Or not, we'll be back to 1966, an incomplete mission. We owe it. We're going to give the people parliamentary reform, constitutional reform. We must have a holistic developmental approach to how this happens. The burden must not always fall back on the taxpayers of this country to provide money to purchase lands that were stolen from the people, both indigenous and African people. The land is not theirs. It's the colonized process that helped them to be in possession, not ownership of the land. So while I understand the rationale for the land being transferred to NHC and ultimately to people who are deserving of it, there is a macro issue that has to be discussed. It has to be discussed, and politicians must not be devoid of testicles. It has to be done. Minister, when you're going to do it when you're going to, in fact, I'm not going to tell you to do it, because I don't know if you might be doing it, and then it might be said that you're doing things because your ignorant friend from St. Michael's East suggests that you do it, and then you don't know who else is going to be there for you, or you receive a lot of lashes that you don't deserve. But if I say that, or I speak the truth, they believe that you tell me to say so for you. Tell you how this thing works in here, man. your name will be etched not only in the annals of history in this parliament, but as a man of revolutionary spirit, a man of courage, a man of vision that was responsible for the transformation of all that is happening in this country. Honourable member from St. James, I'm not going to make reference to you. Expectations are great in the general public, and I want to take this opportunity to insert this important point that I'm extremely happy to see a man of a progressive mind being added to the environment within the parliament of this country. And I hope that you do not breach your commitment to the people of Barbados because you want friendships. The problem in here is that you want to say something. This is not in your case, my friend from St. George. But sometimes you want to say something because you feel the debate ought to be open and objective. I don't dislike no specific person on earth, none. Although it is so to the general public, I don't like certain people of this pigmentation, of this origin. I would be a liar if I don't tell you that I have family that as a result of the intercourse, the miscegenation that exists between man and woman, we produce offsprings of all different types. I tell you where I stand in relation to supporting my people and unapologetically.
I remember you have 3 minutes, please.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, it's probably a good time for you to intervene because I really want to turn to the houses in Haggett Hall, you know.
Please get to them in the 3 minutes.
Yes. And I'm glad that you, on this occasion, is prepared to embrace me. Look, those houses in Haggett Hall, the defects that we are witnessing in Haggett Hall is not the fault of the state at the level of the Ministry of Housing. No way. No way. I got up out my bed 3 o'clock in the morning. The minister was there. He got up out his bed as well. Because I received a call saying that the house is implored. And I rushed up there, believing that I was witnessing another Britain's Crossroad implosion of the units there. And when I got there, the water from upstairs soaked down the entire ceiling. Another night, a ceiling fell down and struck a woman in her head, different units. On 2 or so occasions, people were in the houses getting ready to go to work early in the morning and could not get out of the house because the lock stopped. It is the work that was done by the Chinese construction companies. And I hope that these companies don't ask for any additional finance from the government. The government has no money. The government is the execution officers in these circumstances of the people of Barbados. Money, taxpayers' money. And what the Chinese were paid before, furthermore, than giving them any additional money, they ought to be able to give a major rebate for the kind of work that is being done. These people are doing this thing all over the world. I'm not saying that Americans or any other person are any better, but we have to state to them that this is a 166 square mile country. Because we didn't get a chance to build the peninsulas or the 2 or 3 islands that we promised. We didn't get a chance to do it. But we're still 166 square miles. And hopefully, up at Shark Hole, hopefully the landlord causes you to break off up there. We add on Pelican, and we start to break off some up there too. And hopefully we don't have to face these things. But up to now, we still accept the measurement of 166 square miles.
Honourable member, please wrap up. You've exceeded your
Thank you very
And
much.
we've got a couple of members who wish
Yeah.
to speak.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I always appreciate, ma'am, your rulings and your governing of these chambers. So I want to suggest that the Honourable Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister that is here take into consideration the manner in which the fluids in my brain flowed, and I've been able to deliver aspects of my concerns to you. And I hope that you will take these things into consideration so that we can build a better Barbados and do not allow these people to escape judgment, especially when it comes to selling land that don't belong to them in the first place. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. Member for
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 2:45 p.m., please.
our members, the question is that this honorable chamber be suspended until 2:45 p.m. 2:45 p.m. 2:45 p.m. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber is suspended until 2:45 p.m.